Welcome back to the deep dive. You know that feeling, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
The calendar flips, you've finally packed away all the holiday stuff, and suddenly the air just feels, I don't know, thick with this promise of self-improvement.
Or maybe the demand for it.
Yes, exactly, a demand. It's January 2026. And whether you think this whole thing is about hope or maybe just delusion,
Right.
the first month of the year has this undeniable weight to it, culturally and psychologically.
It absolutely does. And we really have to look at January as a phenomenon, not just, 31 days on a calendar.
Phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, we're creatures of cycles, fundamentally. And the calendar turning over is this huge, shared cultural reset button that we all get to press at the same time.
Yeah.
And for today, we've pulled together a stack of research that looks at January exactly like that. Not as a date range, but as this really loaded concept, a time that our reading describes as being full of hope, new plans, and fresh starts.
All right, so let's unpack that with the kind of depth our listeners expect. The mission for this deep dive is to really dissect that whole concept, to get way past the surface level stuff. We're going to focus on the New Year's resolution as a mechanism. Why that ambition so often just spectacularly collapses by mid-month.
And it does.
And maybe most importantly for you, the learner, we want to look at the specific high-precision language we use to even talk about this idea of beginning again.
Yeah, the linguistic toolkit.
Exactly. We're hunting for actionable insights, both in how to actually set a goal, but also in the surprising power of just using the right words to talk about it.
That's the key. Because the failure of a resolution isn't usually a moral failure, it's a structural and a linguistic failure.
What do you mean by that, a linguistic failure?
We use vague language for huge goals, which is a recipe for disaster. So we're going to move quickly past the simple definitions today to really get at the why behind our collective behavior this month, and how mastering the specific vocabulary gives us a clearer path to success, or at the very least, a much clearer way to talk about our inevitable stumbles.
Mid-month stumbles, yeah.
We have to dig into that cognitive dissonance that makes January so uniquely challenging.
So let's start right there with the immediate experience of January. It's first month, sure, but that simple fact carries this huge emotional echo.
It does.
I mean, the sources kick off with a sentiment that is completely universal. We hear it every single year. Time really flies. It really does feel like just yesterday we were ringing in 2025.
And that observation, that shared feeling about time speeding up, it's not just a cliche. It's actually a really crucial psychological trigger.
How so?
Well, as we get older, our subjective perception of time tends to compress.
Right, because we have fewer new experiences.
Exactly. Routine takes over. So the New Year reset forces us to stop and actually look at that compression, to take stock.
And it's a little scary.
It can be. If time feels like it's flying faster than you can keep up, then the need for structured change, for making the most of that time, suddenly becomes really urgent.
Okay, so that urgency is the fuel.
It's the fuel that feeds directly into the tradition we're focusing on today, New Year's resolutions.
So the acceleration of time creates this anxiety, and the resolution is our cultural attempt to grab the steering wheel back.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so for anyone just jumping into this deep dive, the resolution framework is our core topic. Our readings define them pretty clearly as personal goals or promises you make to yourself.
It's like a contract with your future self.
A self-contract, I like that. It's this formalized act of saying, okay, future me, this is what we're doing now.
And the examples cited in the material are so telling because they're not small things. They really encapsulate these broad, often super ambitious desires for change.
Yeah, they're not small tweaks.
Not at all. They're commitments that target these deeply ingrained habits. The sources cite things like, I'll exercise more, or the classic, I'll stop procrastinating.
Okay, notice the language there. More. Stop. These are not small adjustments.
No, they are fundamental, resource-intensive behavioral shifts. They require long-term, sustained effort and, honestly, a significant overhaul of your daily operating system.
And that, of course, is where we hit the first roadblock.
Okay.
Almost immediately. This brings us to the paradox of intent. The desire for change is huge. It's almost euphoric on January 1st.
Right.
But the follow-through is often, well, pitifully weak.
It is.
And the sources give us this incredibly blunt but very relatable observation. The resolution to stop procrastinating is often considered the most broken resolution ever.
And that one line right there gives us this massive, actionable insight into why resolutions fail.
What's the insight?
We can look at this through the lens of cognitive psychology. There's something called false hope syndrome.
False hope syndrome.
Okay. It's when we set these enormous goals based on an idealized future version of ourselves, a version that doesn't get tired or stressed or bored. We completely ignore our own past behavior and the massive effort required for the change.
So the paradox is that the very resolution designed to make us more productive is the one most likely to be derailed by the behavior it's trying to eliminate.
Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head.
Let's spend a minute on that cognitive dissonance, because it's fascinating. If I resolve to stop procrastinating, and then I put off creating the little action plan I need to do that.
What psychologists call an implementation intention.
Right. Then the whole thing is failed before it's even January 2nd. It's the ultimate self-sabotage loop, isn't it?
It is. The underlying tension is between instant gratification and delayed reward.
Say more about that.
Procrastination is driven by a desire for immediate emotional comfort. I want to avoid the stress of a difficult task right now. A resolution, by its very definition, offers a delayed reward. A healthier body, more money, an organized house that might not show up for 6 months or even a year.
Right.
And our brain's reward system, especially after the holidays when dopamine has been flowing freely.
Yeah, all this sugar and parties.
Exactly. That system struggles to prioritize a distant reward over the immediate comfort of just putting it off.
So January becomes this psychological battlefield. We're aiming for these huge abstract changes, exercising more, procrastinating less. But because the goal is so vague and so daunting, the mental resistance is immediate and powerful.
And the sheer emotional energy it takes to overcome that temptation to delay is often greater than the energy required to just do the task in the first place.
And here's the kicker, right? Because January is the month of hope. That very hope makes the shame of failing early even worse.
Oh, it magnifies it, absolutely. When you fail to stick to that massive resolution by January 15th, the gap between the perfect, idealized you of January 1st and the real you feels enormous.
And that feeling, that recognition of the gap, that's what contributes to what we'll talk about later, the January blues.
It's a huge factor. The cultural weight of the fresh start, ironically, makes the shame of failure even heavier. And it makes it incredibly hard to just pick up the pieces and restart mid-month without feeling like a total failure.
It's a classic setup for a fall, really. We have this collective cultural agreement that January is the time for perfection, and when perfection proves impossible, we don't just adjust the goal.
We abandon it.
We abandon it. So the initial analysis is clear. The failure is baked into the scale and the vagueness of the intent itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift from that cultural context and the psychological traps into the linguistic precision that the sources highlight. As we navigate this, this tricky terrain of intent and failure, the core vocabulary spotlight has to be on the word itself.
Right.
Resolution. Can we start there, not just with the definition, but with the linguistic nuance that's so important?
Absolutely. Our source material gives us a very precise, formal definition. It's a decision or a promise to do something differently, and it's specifically used around the new year.
Okay, a decision or a promise.
And the pronunciation, which is critical for clarity, is given as resolution.
Resolution.
The word itself comes from the Latin resolver, which means to loosen or unfasten. It implies finding a solution or a conclusion, but in modern English, it really means a firm decision.
So it carries more weight than just, say, a wish or an idea.
Much more. And this is where the analysis moves beyond a simple definition into a really actionable linguistic insight, the precision alert about common mistakes.
This is a perfect example of a tiny detail that makes you sound so much more intentional and well-informed.
It is. We are explicitly told in the sources not to say, I did a resolution.
Right. That just sounds wrong to a native speaker, but it's hard to explain why.
And the correct usage, which you really need to internalize, is, I made a resolution.
I made one.
The source material gives us the crucial explanation for the why. And this is where the cognitive distinction is so important. We use make because the process involves creating an idea, formalizing a plan, or designing a blueprint for your future actions.
Ah, okay. So it's not a task you complete like, I did the laundry.
Exactly. It's an abstract concept, a plan, or a commitment that you conceive of and formalize. You made it.
That distinction making versus doing is so crucial for clarity. And I think it affects your mindset too.
How so?
Well, When you make something, you're designing a blueprint, right? You're creating a framework. Think about making a speech or making a contract or making a decision.
They all require planning, conceptualization.
Right. But if you do something, it suggests a completed task, often a physical one. And a resolution, even if you write it down, is still just the plan for the future task. It's not the task itself.
That connects back beautifully to that paradox of intent we were talking about. A resolution is a constructive act. You are literally engineering a roadmap for your behavior. So the verb make perfectly reflects that creative, strategic planning effort.
So if you can master just that one usage point, you immediately sound more confident and precise when you talk about your goals.
Because the language you're choosing actually aligns with the mental effort of the planning. It signals you've moved past just wishing for something and into structured intention.
Okay, let's apply that same precision to the resolution killer. Procrastination.
The big one.
The sources define it clearly as delaying or avoiding doing something, usually out of fear or discomfort or just bad organization. But let's really explore that behavior. It's illustrated as this continuous loop of saying, I'll do it later, again and again.
That repetition is the key characteristic. It's the habit pattern. Procrastination isn't a one-time delay. It's a persistent, often self-justifying habit that's designed for immediate emotional regulation.
Emotion regulation. So it's not about being lazy.
Not at all. It's a system built to avoid the immediate negative feelings associated with a task, whether that's boredom or frustration or the fear of failure.
Right.
So when the sources refer to that continuous loop, they're capturing how deeply ingrained this avoidance pattern can become. It's the immediate emotional discomfort of the resolution's difficulty and scope that drives that "I'll do it later" response.
And if we connect this back to resolution failure, how does procrastination undermine that whole fresh start mentality almost immediately? It feels like the first impulse of your old self is to sabotage the new self.
It acts as an immediate deflation mechanism. It just drags the past right into the present.
What do you mean?
The fresh start is supposed to wipe the slate clean, right?
Right.
But if the first thing you do in the new year is the exact behavior you swore you'd stop, delaying the start of the new fitness plan, putting off the budget review.
You've already dragged the old habits into the new cycle.
Exactly. And that makes the commitment feel shallow, which reduces your motivation and increases the risk of that all-or-nothing thinking trap.
Well, I missed Monday's workout, so the whole resolution is ruined.
That's the one. Procrastination weaponizes the sheer size and vagueness of the typical resolution against you.
Which brings us perfectly to the strategy for success that the source material provides. Since these large abstract resolutions are basically fuel for procrastination.
They are.
The key advice introduced is that to keep motivation strong after the holidays, it helps to set small goals instead of big ones.
And this is the actionable nugget. This is where you contrast the vague resolution with the structured goal.
This is where the synthesis happens, right? The language, the psychology, the practical strategy all come together.
They do. The difference between a huge abstract resolution, like the vague "be healthier," and a small, achievable, measurable goal is just enormous.
The resolution is a declaration of intent. A small goal is a declaration of action.
Perfectly said.
Oh.
And the source gives a great successful example, setting the goal of reading one book a month.
Okay, let's analyze that contrast deeply. Why does reading one book a month succeed where be healthier fails? And where's the line between a small goal and one that's just meaningless?
Success hinges on certainty and immediate feedback. Be healthier is a state of being, it's not an action.
Right.
It requires this constant, massive effort across diet, exercise, sleep, with no clear finish line. It's impossible to measure your daily progress in a convincing way.
But reading one book a month is specific. It's time-bound. It's achievable.
Totally. You can easily track your page count every day. When the month is over, you have a concrete, finished product, a book you've read.
Every time you finish a book, you get that little hit of success, of motivation.
Yes, and that reinforces the positive habit. And the source points out that even if the goal isn't perfectly met, say, the person only reads 9 books that year instead of 12.
They still read 9 more books than they would have otherwise. The improvement was still significant.
And that's the tipping point. The goal has to be large enough to matter, but small enough to be easily initiated.
Right, if the goal was read 1 page a year, that's meaningless. If it was read the entire library, it's overwhelming.
Exactly. The small, measurable goal, like read a single chapter tonight, resists the urge to procrastinate because it feels manageable, not daunting.
It shifts the focus from the identity being a healthy person to the action.
Taking the stairs today.
Right. The emphasis is on building momentum.
The smaller the action, the smaller the friction required to start it. And that initial low-friction start is the only thing that can defeat procrastination.
So the research is clear. Make the goal simple and specific. I will walk for 15 minutes immediately after dinner, not I will exercise more.
That clear pathway is what sidesteps the procrastination loop. This linguistic precision, choosing actionable verbs and specific metrics, is the true antidote to the paradox of intent.
So the goal isn't perfection, which the source material reminds us of later. It's momentum and measurable progress.
Yes. That structured approach to goal setting, the very act of defining the small steps, is what keeps motivation strong long after that January 1st euphoria has faded away.
Okay, so once we've established that January is for making resolutions, and the best strategy is small goals, we can turn to the special linguistic tools we use to describe this transition.
Right.
We often hear the phrase fresh start, and in the context of avoiding procrastination and focusing on small wins, it really does feel like more than just a cliche.
It is. The definition offered is key. Beginning again, like turning the page in a new chapter.
The power is in the metaphor, isn't it?
The psychological power of that metaphor is huge. A fresh start functions like a cognitive reset button. By framing the change as a new chapter in a book, we're implicitly saying that the past chapter is closed. It's edited, it's done.
Which allows for a clean, structural break from the past, including past failures. It minimizes the shame.
Exactly. The psychological benefit of that phrase is enormous because it linguistically mandates optimism.
It's like you're telling your brain, the data from last year is irrelevant. We start collecting new, good data today.
And this positive outlook is reinforced by the specialized idioms we use. These idioms are like linguistic shortcuts for these complex psychological processes.
And our sources identify two key expressions for making positive changes. Exploring them helps us understand how language really shapes our reality. So first up is turn over a new leaf. We need to go past the basic definition to start behaving better or improve yourself and really analyze the metaphor itself.
Historically, it's a very evocative metaphor. While some people trace it back to the pages of a book or a ledger, the botanical or natural metaphor is maybe more instructive.
Like a tree.
Yeah, think of a tree in the spring. It sheds its dead foliage and grows new, fresh, vibrant leaves. It suggests a cyclical, natural, and very noticeable outward change.
So it's an improvement that's visible to the world.
Right. The example provided, this year I'm turning over a new leaf, I'll be more organized, shows that the focus is on a specific, observable change in behavior.
What's critical about turning over a new leaf is that it implies you're acknowledging the past. The metaphor accepts that the old leaf, the past behavior, the messy chapter, existed, but the focus is decisively on the fresh, new, better version that replaces it. It's a commitment to proactive change, not just passive waiting.
You don't just wait for the leaf to turn, you actively turn it over. It requires volition.
It requires action.
And we can connect this right back to our successful goal-setting strategy. Instead of saying, I will be a better spouse, which is totally abstract,
You'd say?
I am turning over a new leaf by committing to having dinner together without phones 3 times a week.
That shift from a vague intent to a specific actionable behavior is where the idiom gets its power. It formalizes the intention to improve in a specific area.
Which contrasts nicely with the second idiom, out with the old, in with the new.
Right. The definition is about letting go of old habits or things and welcoming new ones. This phrase suggests more of a replacement, a ritualistic purging.
This idiom is profoundly ritualistic. You hear it shouted at New Year's parties. You see it applied after big life changes. It recognizes the need for negative space.
Negative space.
You can't introduce the new behavior effectively until you have deliberately ejected the old one. This applies to your emotions, your physical space, and your habits.
And the specific example the source gives is so relatable, cleaning your room after the holidays.
Yes.
That context of physical decluttering immediately makes the abstract idea of habit change feel tangible and real. We all know that feeling of staring at a drawer full of junk.
Right. Old expired vitamins or a box of forgotten paperwork.
And realizing that just admitting it's garbage is the first necessary step toward a better future.
And what's crucial about this phrase is its dual application. It applies equally to physical things, cleaning the room, getting rid of old clothes, and to intangible habits or mindsets.
It's a linguistic tool to frame the act of purging.
It is. If you are in with the new habit of reading 1 book a month, you must implicitly be out with the old habit of spending that same hour just scrolling aimlessly on your phone.
You have to clear the structural space, the time, the energy the mental bandwidth, for the new behavior to actually have a chance to flourish.
So these two idioms work together, really, to support that fresh start.
Turning over a new leaf focuses on improving personal behavior through positive action.
While out with the old, in with the new focuses on clearing the structural space, both physical and psychological, by ritualistically purging the negative anchors of the past.
They give us a rich, positive vocabulary that reinforces the mental shift we need for small, sustained goal achievement. Now we have to address the inevitable counterforce to all this positive language. The emotional reality check that hits around mid-January.
To crash.
The crash. We call it the January blues. And it's critical we move past the simple definition and look at the underlying causes the research describes.
This is a widely recognized and often biologically driven feeling. The term describes that period where people feel a little sad, tired, or just have significantly low energy after the emotional peak of the holidays.
And it's important to normalize it. The material says, don't worry, it's normal.
It is. It's a natural crash after a peak of social engagement, financial indulgence, and structured celebration.
The source material is very clear about the multiple causes. Let's start with the environmental and physiological ones. The fun is over, you're back to work or school.
And everything feels slower.
Right. You've returned to the mundane routine of the winter months, which is often compounded by low sunlight and bad weather.
Exactly. The low sunlight, especially in northern latitudes, has a real impact on your serotonin and melatonin regulation. It contributes to seasonal mood changes.
And there's a neurochemical element too, right?
A big one. During the holidays, there's a sustained release of dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol, all driven by excitement, anticipation, social activity.
But when that stimulation just stops cold on January 2nd,
the system experiences a crash. That low-grade exhaustion and sadness is then compounded by the financial stress from holiday spending. And then, on top of all of that, the immediate self-inflicted pressure to be perfect with your ambitious resolutions.
it's a perfect emotional storm. The joy is gone, the weather is grim, the credit card bill is due, and you're supposed to start all these massive new habits.
That combination creates a very specific low-grade exhaustion and sadness that can feel overwhelming, and it is completely antithetical to sustained motivation.
Which is why the strategy for managing this needs to be low friction.
Yes.
So what's the simple but effective advice provided for managing this emotional shift? It aligns perfectly with what we said about small goals.
It does. It's surprisingly low-tech and effective. Talking to friends or doing small things you enjoy helps a lot.
It reinforces the whole strategy from Section 2. Avoid huge, daunting tasks and lean into small, sustainable sources of enjoyment and connection.
The emphasis here is on connection and self-compassion. Isolation feeds the shame of a broken resolution.
Right.
By talking to friends, you realize your experience is shared. Everyone is struggling with their massive goals and the cold weather and the post-holiday slump.
Connection combats isolation and the shame of failure.
And small pleasures. A specific book, a favorite coffee, a short walk. They counteract the massive internalized pressure of these huge, overwhelming resolutions. It lowers the performance bar and allows for necessary emotional rest.
Okay, so moving from the emotional blues to a practical linguistic tool for navigating those social situations where our resolution failures might come up. The source introduces a great conversational nudge, let's just say.
This is a superb piece of functional language. It's what's known as a hedging device.
A hedging device.
Yeah, it's used when you want to give a funny or a polite answer without having to go into too much detail. It functions as a social lubricant. It implies a shared context without needing a full confession.
It allows you to protect yourself, or maybe the other person, from an overly detailed, potentially uncomfortable explanation. The example given is perfect. Let's just say it's not a morning person. It implies a whole narrative, I have struggled to wake up early. Without requiring the speaker to confess, they hit the snooze button 17 times.
And to really unpack its utility, we should think about when it's appropriate. It works best for these non-critical failures or embarrassing moments where the full detail is just unnecessary.
Or would create social friction.
Right. If someone asks, how's a new budget looking? And you've overspent, a simple, well, let's just say I've developed a very close relationship with my credit card statement this month, is perfect.
It's a lighthearted acknowledgement without inviting a full financial audit from your coworker.
Exactly.
So let's contrast this with the source's example of a less successful resolution. The person who resolved to wake up early but likes their pillow too much.
A very relatable person.
Very. Imagine you're in the break room and a colleague asks, So how's that early morning routine come along? Did you make it to the gym today?
Instead of launching into a detailed confession about the existential crisis of leaving a warm bed at 5 a.m., the exhaustion from the January blues, the total failure of willpower,
You just deploy the phrase.
you deploy the phrase, well, let's just say my relationship with my pillow is currently winning the battle for control of my life.
It's a graceful conversational exit. It conveys the necessary information. The resolution is not going well while staying humorous and polite.
And it avoids the need for a deep self-critique in a casual setting. It's a crucial way of signaling a failure without dwelling on it, which, again, is excellent motivational hygiene when you're dealing with a broken resolution.
You acknowledge the slip without letting it define you.
That's it.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, let's get back to linguistic precision, but this time focus specifically on talking about time in January. This is another one of those areas where a small correction instantly improves your clarity and shows a real commitment to detail. The importance of prepositions, specifically in versus on.
This is a frequent point of confusion for people learning English, but the rules are very consistent. And once you learn them, they provide immediate structural clarity.
So let's explain the usage rules and then connect that precision back to goal setting.
Good idea.
So let's start with the general rule. When do we use in January?
We use in January when we're talking generally about the entire month, referring to the whole time frame, or any period larger than a single day.
So the rule is use in for months, seasons, and years.
That's it. The example provided is clear. My birthday is in January. We would also say, I start my new fitness plan in the new year, or the weather is coldest in winter.
It means sometime within that extended period without getting specific.
Right. And when do we switch to on? What's the trigger for using on?
We use on January 20th when we are specifying a precise particular date or a specific day.
The rule here is that on comes before specific days or dates. So a date in January, a specific day of the week, or a public holiday.
Right. So we would say the meeting is on Monday, or I will start my new resolution on January 3rd.
This small distinction is so essential because it moves the focus from a general time frame to a singular point in time. It is the language of specificity.
So if I say I will travel to London in January, it just means any time during those 31 days.
Vague.
But if I say I will arrive in London on January 15th, the plan suddenly becomes actionable and precise.
Precisely. And this is often contrasted with a third preposition, at, which refers to the most specific point in time. Hours, minutes, specific moments.
Here's an example.
We will have the launch party at midnight on January 1st in the new year.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
For big periods, on for specific days, at for specific times.
Mastering that hierarchy is critical for clear communication. You would never say, I will see you in January, because January is too broad for on. You have to have the date.
And the source sums this up perfectly, emphasizing that this tiny detail is key to sounding nice and clear. So why do these little linguistic markers matter so much in the grand scheme of setting goals?
Because of the principle of alignment. Vague language encourages vague action, which we've already established is the killer of resolutions. Precise language facilitates precise planning and precise execution.
So if your goal is call my mother more often, that's vague.
But if your goal is, I will call my mother on Sunday at 3 p.m., you've set up a specific time-bound slot that is far less prone to that I'll do it later procrastination loop.
Precision, even in prepositions, serves the overall mission of effective action and communication.
It does.
Okay, let's review. We have navigated the cultural load of the month, detailed the pitfalls of procrastination and the paradox of intent, offered strategies for small motivational goals, explored the rich language of positive change, and learned how to talk about failure gracefully.
And we refined our usage of time prepositions.
Let's recap the core elements and just synthesize the principles we've covered.
Let's do it. We started by analyzing the need to make a formal commitment, a resolution, and that really important linguistic rule that we make them not do them.
Because they are strategic plans, blueprints. That emphasis on making forces you into a planning mindset.
Then we analyzed the resolution killer, procrastination. We defined it as that continuous loop of delaying, which is rooted in emotional avoidance.
And we talked about how that immediately undermines the concept of a fresh start, which is the linguistic equivalent of turning the page to a new, clean chapter.
And we looked at the positive vocabulary of change, which is so essential for keeping your motivation up. This included those powerful idioms.
Right. Turn over a new leaf, which means committing to a specific, visible improvement.
And out with the old, in with the new, which applies to that ritualistic purging you need to do to clear mental and physical space for new habits.
We also recognize the inevitable emotional dip of the January blues. That sadness or tiredness driven by neurochemical crashes, financial stress, and low sunlight.
And the simple, effective advice for that: talking to friends and doing small, enjoyable things helps manage that post-holiday letdown and fights isolation.
Furthermore, we introduced the conversational tool, let's just say.
Which provides that critical social function of managing disclosures about our resolution failures politely and with humor.
It allows us to acknowledge a slip without indulging in self-shame.
Exactly.
And finally, we reinforce that success in January and in learning requires a philosophy of continuous improvement, guided by precision.
You don't have to be perfect.
Just keep learning step by step. That incremental, linguistically precise approach is the necessary antithesis of the large, abstract, overwhelming resolution that tends to fail by mid-month.
It's all about building motivation through small, achievable wins, structured by specific language. The research consistently identifies this move from vague, high-level intent to clear, low-friction action as the only reliable path to sustained progress.
So to summarize this extensive deep dive, January gives us this unique, culturally recognized moment to hit the reset button. We've learned that the success of that fresh start really hinges on three critical pillars: linguistic precision, knowing you make a resolution, using the correct prepositions.
Incremental action focusing on those small, measurable goals that fend off procrastination.
And graceful failure, using tools like, let's just say, and community support to navigate the inevitable January blues without just abandoning the whole effort.
We've armed you with quick, thorough knowledge about the cultural, psychological, and linguistic mechanics of the New Year cycle.
You now have the vocabulary and the strategy to describe your goals, plan your actions, and manage your setbacks with clarity and resilience.
Your curiosity and your desire for this level of precision is exactly what this deep dive is designed to satisfy.
Now, for a final, provocative thought to leave you with, one that builds on the source material's conclusion. Our readings finish the discussion of January by teasing the possibility of discussing February and love.
Right.
And we focus so intensely on self-improvement and personal goals this month, that self-contract we talked about.
If January is about that internal contract, the new chapter you write for and about yourself, fitness, career, organization, what if we consider the natural pivot into February, not just as being about romantic love, but about shifting that whole fresh start mentality outward?
Interesting. So we spent a month being critically focused on our own flaws and fixes.
Exactly.
And building on that idea of step-by-step progress, maybe the next evolution of a successful resolution is less about self-discipline and more about relational or emotional connections.
So the goal moves from internal productivity, like reading one book a month, to external empathy and sustained relationship investment.
The commitment you made to yourself in January can now be extended outward as a commitment to others in February.
Indeed. And the commitment to sustained learning, which you've just demonstrated by listening to this deep dive, is itself a fundamental form of positive change.
Keep that momentum going step by step.
And perhaps next month, the goal of turning over a new leaf can extend to how we engage with and improve our world through our connection with others.
Food for thought until our next deep dive.
Until then.